Hey y'all, it's Maritime in America again, a podcast where we're charting America's offshore stories. It's the only podcast that highlights mariners' perspectives on issues facing the offshore community and the greater U.S. maritime community. I'm your host, Aaron Smith of the Offshore Marine Service Association. Each Friday, I'll bring you the Offshore Briefing, a quick rundown of the week's notable developments, updates, and news you need to know in the offshore space. In addition, we'll feature a special guest from the maritime world, bringing a mariner's voice and real-world perspectives straight to the show. Joining me are my co-hosts, Ashley and Angelle, where we'll strengthen the maritime American mariner's voice by diving into the people, policies, and powerful currents shaping the U.S. maritime community. Whether you're on deck or at your desk, we're glad you're here.
Welcome, everybody, to Maritime in America. We are having another great episode here of our full flagship episode where we interview a guest. And so with me, I have my usual co-host, Angelle Johnson and Ashley Smith. How are you all doing?
Just great. Nice and warm.
Good. And then with us, we have our special guest, Dr. Representative Joe Orgeron. I don't know how to put all of your superlatories.
Dr. Rep. Mr. Joe Orgeron. I think that's perfect.
Yes. Do we have to add a captain in there? Do you have your license?
No. Honorable would be the one that I'm usually, mentioned that normally has there. It just makes me laugh because,
The honorable, yeah.
The Honorable
Yeah,
Dr. Joe Orgeron. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, every time I hear that word, I think about in high school I got academic all-state honorable mention, but on my certificate it was misspelled homerable for academics. So I always just think every time I think homerable. So
That was in the 1920s, 1930s.
Yeah, quiet down over there. All right, but Rep, great to have you. Thank you so much for coming
Great to
on.
be here.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Joseph Orgeron, born and raised down in Bayou Lafourche, currently serving as state representative, Louisiana State Representative for District 54, which I normally deem as Lafourche Parish, starting around Highway 90 all the way down to Port Fourchon and the jewel of Jefferson, Grand Isle.
And that's great. And how long have you been the representative for that for
Since 2020, won in a special election after the unfortunate COVID-based passing of the representative who had just gotten elected.
Right. Yeah. So, well, that is
Wow,
good.
it's been 6 years. It's crazy.
That is great. That's great. And then, so tell us about your, because everyone, at least I would hope all of our listeners have read Rise of the Cajun Mariner, or if they have not, they should be ordering it. You can still find copies. You have to find them secondhand. We have to talk to Woody, see if they can do another print, because I know
We have 2 copies.
We have 2 copies, but I've lent, we oscillate somewhere between 3 and 0. Because I lend them out and they don't get returned. So we currently have 2, yes. But the first words of that book are Bobby Orgeron. And that book is about the start of the industry, and your family is the first 2 words of the start of the industry. So talk about your family's history in the maritime space.
Well, the story is about 4 different families and how they basically at that time in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s risked everything in order to build up the boat business, the offshore support industry as offshore drilling kind of boomed. So we went through booms and busts, and basically that story, that novel basically highlights all the crazy antics that happened. And for me, the biggest learning from it was the level of risk that was being taken in those days is just, not imaginable today, that you would build a business and then at each step of trying to grow that business, You might risk today 30-40% of the business, but in those days they were risking 80, 90 and the whole show in order to get to that next level.
Well,
So
and
it's a great story.
not just 80 to 90% of the business, but 80 to 90% of their entire livelihoods. And, that's their, and, their family, every penny they have. And that's something that I've always liked about this industry is it was so daring. And so that's cool. Well, so then talk about, so your family started in kind of the offshore tug market or luggers and, kind of the smaller vessels. But then, the family company was always known and it still has some of the most technologically capable, largest lift boats ever. Talk
Yeah.
about that transition into that
Well,
market.
Well, my dad started with crew boats, and then basically had a fleet of, it was always 5 to 7 vessels, and then basically would sell off the older ones and build supply boats. So we went from crew boats to supply boats, and then as we had supply boats and got rid of the last crew boats, he started building offshore rig moving tugboats. So then we were in supply and tug and phasing through that. And then as we got off, rid of the last supply boats, we started building lift boats, small lift boats to work with Chevron on the shelf. And then ultimately, my brother took over the business and having tugboats and lift boats, and then eventually liquidated all the lift boats. I'm sorry, all the tugboats, and we went to strictly lift. And from there on, we just started growing them getting them as big, pushing the envelope, deeper water, working on construction, pipeline repairs, and ultimately focusing on a lot of decommissioning of the shelf problem.
Yeah. It was some very cool boats and some very cool, some of the ones full helideck on them, dynamic positioning, which I think only two lift boats that have dynamic positioning, at least in the U.S. that I've ever seen. Really cool technological masterpieces, that the kind of stuff that I always loved as a nerd in this industry. So
We love pushing the technological envelope, and I had a little assistance in some of the technology, but primarily I focused on the hospitality side
yeah,
of assuring the creature comforts for the workers on there. That it literally became a floating hotel with the best possible Wi-Fi and television programming, and accommodations and food as well.
well, and that kind of goes back to your background. I introduced you as Dr. Joe Orgeron, and a lot of people don't know this. I still think a lot of people don't know this about you, that you are a PhD. And what are you a PhD in?
Experimental applied physics. It's pretty much what I focused on, and that was a decision right in the mid '80s, in the downturn, where my dad sat me down and said, "We really just don't have enough money to fund another executive in the family business. Go get an education and anything else, and we'll gladly pay for it." So I was very coming out of high school. I loved science, pure science, and physics was it. So came to Nicholls State University, was the last person to graduate with a 4-year physics degree from Nicholls, and then went
Really?
on to University of Texas at Dallas. Right at the time, for the older crowd, the superconducting super collider was going to be built, and the month that
I remember.
Congress said it would be done and built in Waxahachie, Texas, was the month I started my graduate degree. And practically 5 years to the date later, whenever I defended my PhD, was the month that Congress killed the project. So
Yeah. Um, Probably Ashley and Angelle might be a little too.
Do you know? No, I was about to say, I'm
I
not the youngest on this call, but I'm usually the youngest, and I know what it is.
Yeah, I always remember. Yeah, that project dominated headlines
Mhm.
for, yeah, a decade, and then nothing came about it. Yeah, it was unfortunate.
So, Joe,
Um,
real quick, I want to interrupt. Who from, because we always talk about, we like to bring this podcast into family. Who from your family worked for the business? I know you went off and got your degree and came back, but who worked for y'all?
My
between you and
brother
your
Lee
brothers
pretty
and
much
everything?
stayed at the
Yep.
helm the whole time, and then Lee's kids and many of our cousins and distant family members also worked.
Okay. So it was strictly family, like most of the companies that that
Yeah,
are AMSA members or just in general in this
right.
in this
And
industry.
non-family members who the father you started with my dad, and then all the sons ultimately came
Yeah.
work for
Well,
Monco.
that's
So
basically family and
multiple families, basically,
cool. Okay.
extended
Yeah.
family.
And it's
And
so
what
much fun to work with family, right?
Yeah. Giscalaire family, Danos family. It was a few others
Yeah.
that we were.
Cool.
well, I've always because we just had on Garrett Rice from Masterboat, and he talked about how he went and worked as a CPA in Birmingham after college, and you obviously went to Mars, M&M Mars, and worked there. I know Otto the Third went and worked, got
Crowley.
a
Oh,
got his business degree from Nichols. And I do think it's interesting that I think our industry has been very good about kind of sending kids out, getting some experience, and then bringing them. It's not just like an immediate. As someone who's not ever been in a family business, I find that very fascinating and interesting, and I think it's probably been to the great success of our industry to have those outside perspectives.
whenever I graduated, had a job at the Super Collider, and that got canceled, going back immediately back to Montco in the family business was an option. But I was like, I'm not going to sell myself short, and having gotten this education, let me make a stab at it. So that's basically why I opted to move to New Jersey and work for M&M Mars, which I had no idea initially why they wanted a physicist that had done work on artificial intelligence and neural network modeling and forecasting. But it quickly became evident whenever I landed there and got the job, and I realized that I'd be working in crop forecasting, utilizing I guess climatological data, basically to help make the models for them to predict the annual crop outcome of peanuts, almonds, sugar, guar, cocoa, everything else, wheat, corn, everything that they use for all of the and they not only do candy, they also do all of the cow can pedigree pet foods, and they
Oh, really?
also had at the time Uncle Ben's and Susie Wan. They had main meals, they had pet food, and they had confection,
Well,
and
that
so
is
it was
cool.
really broad.
And that's great perspective to bring back to the family industry. And so now, obviously came back to Montco, came back to the South Louisiana, not only the family business, but the family of the geography. Um, and now I think it's interesting that, I can't keep track of exactly how many jobs you have besides being a state rep then. So why don't you talk about your other day jobs outside of being a state rep?
Okay, outside of a state rep, today my pays the electric bill job, I would say, would be executive director of a nonprofit restore retreat, 25 years. And that's basically post Hurricane Katrina. There was a group of people that really saw that the Barataria and Terrebonne, the two wetlands on either side of Bayou Lafourche, or should I say, from the Mississippi River to Bayou Lafourche and from the Bayou Lafourche to Chafalaya. Those two areas, in addition to natural resources and hydrocarbons and everything else that have enriched all of our lives, of course, there's waterfowl, duck hunting, fishing, shrimping, oysters, crabs, everything else. It's just massive biodiversity area. And what we see is, since the levying of the Mississippi River, a slow estuarial necrosis, a slow degradation of the marsh. And with that, it adds additional challenging to keeping the community and the culture resilient and sustainable in this area. Some people say it's, climate change and rising sea level. But science has shown that even though there is some sea level rise, South Louisiana, without that replenishment
Yeah.
of sediment, we're literally compacting and subsiding into the ever so slightly rising sea more than anything else. And then, after Ida explicitly writing the levies with our levy manager and wanting to just pat him on the back, not a cat. I know it's cat 4, but we see it as a cat 5 coming through Fouchon, and the 200-year storm of a lifetime, and not a single home in my South Lafourche hometown levied area got flooded, not a single one. So I wanted to pat him on the back, and he basically looked out and said, "But look at the marsh.
Yeah.
It sacrificed its life,
Yeah.
to attenuate that storm surge. So we really need to rebuild that marsh." And it gave me a new perspective on the long-term viability of my hometown. Really, the levees are there, but the levees are only as good as the supporting characters, the barrier islands, the back marsh, the swamp, the land bridges, everything else, that all the other components that CPRE work on that need to be done. So anyway, that's one of my jobs today as executive director of this nonprofit and fighting.
Well, and it's such an important job because it benefits all of us. Without those marshes, we don't have that sponge to absorb those storms. We don't have those speed bumps to slow them down. And then we're all living north of Highway 90, but the oil field is still
Mhm.
far, far south of
Sticking
us.
out there.
We still, you got to get between them. So it is important, and we got to have those. And look, I mean, I find it incredibly scary that in my short tenure, I've been going down to Fouchon. Probably the first time I went down to Fouchon was probably 2011. So not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And I know there are areas that used to be land that are now water on that
Correct.
drive down.
I mean, even Grand
Yep.
Isle looks different. But before we move on from this, anyone listening, what can they do to help? Like, how
Great
can they
question.
help your organization besides
Support,
just
support. Yeah, I would say, I always say contact or, communicate with your uh, local officials, state legislators, your federal delegation, letting them know how important restoring the coast is or maintaining coastal restoration. Uh, uh, act, get active with Restore Retreat. I mean, we've Restore Retreat over its 25 years used to be a lot of education and advocacy through social events, Toast for the Coast, and things like that. And now we've kind of pivoted more towards coming in on the back end of a large CPRA project and coming in and doing volunteer planting and vegetative replantings in order to make any of these terraces or land bridges, any of these coastal restoration features, trying to provide additional resiliency by planting mangroves and swamp grass. So restoreorretreat.org is our website, and you could sign up for our contact list. And
Yeah, and I know our daughter's school, they're really into sustainability and giving back, so they do a lot. I think every year because we have two different grades, they go out and they help with the oysters. They've gone and planted the mangroves before. It's kind of the Sacred Heart. They've done quite a lot. I don't know if it's with your organization or what organization, but they've done field trips. That's part of their community goals to help out. So if more schools could get involved and teach the kids young. I know Maisie, our social justice warrior, she's in seventh grade. She's like, no, we don't need any more plastic. Do you know what this does to like the more they know, the more, it
He
helps
is,
out.
yeah. Uh,
yeah,
but I
She
gotta
gets
say
so
that
upset when people tear down trees to build houses. I mean, we call her the Lorax too.
that is that is so that
that
mission is so important there that it's not just about these big civil construction projects. It's the kind of the smaller, that last 10% that can make it successful. Actually, I was the last time I flew in from DC a few weeks ago, I was trying to get a picture because as we came over the marsh, there were some of the speed bumps they built, the herringbone patterns, and about half had been
terraces.
planted and half had not, and you could just see which half was going to wash away. and so you spend all that money to create the terraces and to build those, some sustain the marsh. But if there's nothing planted on it, it's just going to wash away, and that's unfortunate to see. So, such a good mesh.
Sometimes I call it just simply putting the cherry on top. It's like the state does the gathering of the flour, eggs, and milk, and they bake the cake. And all we're doing is basically the icing and the cherry on top, but it's getting the citizens activated and being out there and getting buy-in from the community so that they know where that Go Mesa money and those BP fines are going preserve and increase the resiliency and sustainability of the communities near the coast, our working coast. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well, that's such an important mission for everyone,
Yeah.
everyone that lives
So,
around there.
so that was one job that I had.
That's one
Another
job. I
one
was going
was
to move on to which job you want to do
adjunct
next.
professor at Nicholls State. I don't know if you wanted to get into
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
No, I think that's very
post
important.
Deepwater Horizon, we got a lot of compliancy coming down on our industry. And early on, that was right after. I mean, it was 2011, 2012, whenever you started coming down here, all the compliancy coming down, and all of the boat owners at the AMSA meetings were talking about, man, I just don't have a college educated person to help me with a lot of this new compliancy stuff. So Nicholls basically factioned off a small part of their business school 4-year degree and said, and of course, Otto Candies and Secor and Bollingers and Danos and Modco all stepped up and basically helped fund the adjunct professors. And me having the PhD allowed me to be one of the lecturers and sponsor other co-lecturers. So basically, I signed up for 5 years, and then I ended up doing it for 12 years. And it's a very rewarding profession to be able to teach young students about our industry, about the 24/7 beyonds. Uh, kind of right off the bat, in one of the first lectures, I tell them, if this is not the type of job you want, then go look to be a librarian or something, because it's always on in the vessel business. But basically teaching them about the industry, and through the 12 years that I taught, it was all about the Gulf of Mexico oil and gas. And then whenever we had downturns, we focused the brown water. And then we did a lot with Kirby and Archer Daniel Midlands and Cooper moving tugs, and we kind of brought that into like another segment of maritime industry on the river. And then subsequently with offshore wind starting on the East Coast, started adding a third segment of basically offshore wind vessels and all the types of vessels, and basically opened up a lot of kids' minds. And it's great going to the workboat show and seeing them and running into them and seeing them now in their new jobs. So that's, maybe they've been at it for 10 years now, but knowing that you had an impact on their life in some way, shape.
No, and it's so good. And you're right. There were so many people from our industry that invested their time, their money into this program to create what the industry needed. And I'm not going to say that's unique. Lots of other industries have done that at schools, but I think it was very important. It was also that it was Nicholls based. That this was, too many. It is great that we have, and we've interviewed people from around the country and bringing that this isn't a South Louisiana industry. But at the same time, the people who live here should, we need to make sure that they have the ability to get into what is a great industry and a great career. So I've always applauded Nicholls for making that happen, and we don't have to go to some business school or something like that from states away. We have a great one right here. So that's always been very cool for me to see. Um, so, with that, I wanted, and you mentioned offshore wind. That's where I first met you, was when I was working for
For the
Congress.
record, he wasn't even done his jobs.
What?
I said
What did
he
you
wasn't
say?
even finished all of his jobs, for the record.
That's we could move on. I mean, it's all right.
No, no, I'm just pointing out that you have more.
Oh, I know. I know.
Yeah, I look at
Um,
my own resume, Ashley, and I'm like, am I a vampire? Have I lived too many lifetimes or something like that? But no,
Oh, I
just
thought
packed
I
many
thought that
different
I
careers, academia, science, and anyway, global food
yeah, that
business,
maybe
that
you
offshore.
are a
would
vampire. That's why you look so
Now
young.
I'm not. I think I would be that the one that. Never mind. Let's move on. Okay, offshore wind.
that
Working at
was yeah,
Montco.
that's where I met you.
Yeah, working
Was
working with lift boats and Lee and us building the two largest DP ones, going after all these, I'm going to call it the far reach decommissioning, the waters between 180 feet where traditional lift boats could work,
Mhm.
and the deeper waters, and basically working with Lee on the number of platforms out there, the market space, and seeing is this the rest of our Gulf vessel lift boat market is all about decommissioning. And I just said, we already have sales reps who go and get those jobs. I want to, in addition to what I'm doing in Montco, I also want to go try to get out of scope jobs. I want to, I did things where we installed flare booms on the backs of the Merce drill ships that they would have had to go to Antigua or the Canary Islands to find a dock. They would have to demove a tremendous amount, costly, but we were able to do it with lift boats in a novel. What I call a Tarzan swinging, the thrusters underneath some of the drill ships and all, often Mobile Bay and things like that. So all of those, I'm going to call them obscure, out of scope construction jobs. And then I basically found European scientists who wanted to do basically scientific coring, deep coring, needed a stable platform to operate in always 60 to 100 feet of water. Lift boat was the perfect opportunity. So that got me up to the East Coast. And I went up there looking for the scientific coring to maybe be a new thing. And whenever we finished the job and all the Europeans were grabbing their bags and running off the gangway, the phone started ringing. And it was first one, then two, and finally three different offshore wind entities up on the East Coast that wanted to come and see the boat. And the fact that there was a coring unit already installed on it
Mhm.
was like exactly because they were getting ready to do site specific coring wherever they were planning on doing these wind farms. And ultimately we signed up before demobbing back to the Gulf. I asked the Europeans who I was on contract with, would you like a 10% reduction on your demob costs because somebody else wants to pay it and use the boat for 10 days? And they loved the idea. They were able to throw a fantastic Christmas party that year, and I got an entry into a new market. And that's how
Yeah.
basically I then realized uh the East Coast, despite their long maritime history of whaling and shipping since the Pilgrims, if it comes to building stuff offshore, they can't find their butt with both hands. I mean, they need Cajun ingenuity. They need the Cajun mariner to come up there and help them.
Yeah.
Uh, so anyway, I was really lucky to get in at that time, work on Block Island, go to the AMSA meetings, tell my fellow lift boat competitors, look, you really need to stay, or all of them. And now you got Geis and Otto and Hornbeck and a whole bunch of Aries Marines, all
Mhm.
putting some small fraction of their fleet up on the East Coast to work in that industry. And it's great to have that revenue stream that's not connected to the price of a barrel of oil. That was something that we always looked for. So
Yeah.
anyway,
And look, it was those companies, and they were the ones you mentioned, and others were on the vanguard. They started talking about offshore wind in the United States 2016, 2017. You were talking to me about offshore wind in 2011.
right.
Yeah. So that's really amazing there. In fact, the first time I met Joe, um, Jeff Landry had come up and invited him to testify at a hearing in Congress, and we had Joe, and the rest of us have an accent. Joe doesn't. But then seated next to him was this guy from the United Kingdom who spoke the Queen's English. And I've never seen people get whiplashed by accents before. And I think you leaned into it. I think both of you leaned into it. And we're just like, can we confuse these people anymore by just talking after each other? It was a great hearing.
Good. I enjoyed it. I remember that that week explicitly, and remember being a little intimidated if Ed Markey was gonna ask me a bunch of difficult questions, but I think it went well. I think we basically, I think what the crux of that meeting was for to assure that BOEM continued to do the leasing for offshore
Yep.
wind, and we didn't
Yes.
branch off and do yet another federal entity to be the landlords of our ocean space. We already had that, and I think we made that point.
Exactly. No, that is exactly what the hearing was the
Was
law gives the current framework, and it could, there could be some changes there. There can definitely be some changes in the permitting process, but that we have the basic framework. We don't need to go recreate the wheel. It's and like so many of our friends in offshore wind say, I mean, it's the same basic principles that we're doing here. It is a marine construction project, just the derrick goes up instead of down is kind of is that's what you're building offshore here. And so it's something that, yeah, those of us in South Louisiana do have a lot
I
of
term it. I tell mariners all the time. Look, you work offshore, you do support of offshore energy infrastructure. Whether the end person signing the check is reaching down for hydrocarbons or up for air pressure, our check is all the same. Our job is practically the same.
yeah.
So they do work.
Well, I tell some of our red state friends, that maybe don't aren't naturally inclined to like wind. If you're working in an engine room, you don't know you're working in wind. The boat doesn't know it's working in a wind farm. It's doing the same thing.
And ultimately, at the end, all the money's going through the same hands anyway.
Well, being a physicist, I really appreciate energy density and renewables, wind and solar are really energy sparse. They're not energy dense like hydrocarbons or even more energy dense like nuclear and ultimately fusion, which I know we're going to
Mhm.
eventually get to. But in the meantime, I am all of the above, and I still support offshore wind where it makes sense. And on the East Coast, with the high population density, the retiring power stations, power
Yeah.
plants being retired, and so many people living on the coast, having those that consistent offshore wind energy backfeeding into the endpoints near the coast still makes sense for them, and basically makes good dollars and cents for the offshore vessel operators of the Gulf of Mexico to go up there and show them how to do.
Yeah. And
Sounds like a great sales pitch.
that is.
But
We're in a
because it's so
4-year kind of
well, it's
run
a
in place
logical
right
thing.
now, but we're going to get over it. I think as soon
Yeah.
as there's a change, the next changing of the guard, I think we'll resume right where we left off. I think this is just a one person slow down show right now. So that's it.
And I think we're actually going to say, I would say we'll be better off because I think we inherited some European funding models that I don't think worked. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't work to set your price that you're going to charge the consumer years in advance before you know any of the input costs. That's dumb. And I think in the next iteration they will have grown past that. Maybe that
Yeah.
style works in
Yeah.
Europe. You have some more controls there. It doesn't work here.
At some of these wind farm conferences, they make people text in terms, right? And one time I texted in a term and it popped up like dead center, and it was contract Americanization. And it was what you were saying. It's the model that the wind market in Europe will not work in our US Jones Act manner, and lawyers and maritime lawyers who would ask me, hey, I'm interested in getting into that space. I said, take one of their contracts and figure out a way to Americanize it,
Yeah.
because the way that they do risk, push down, and pushing down the risk to lower tiers is just going to make it too expensive here in the US with that model. So
It-
you're right. Aaron, I remember maybe being on a podium for AMSA and talking about how the Biden administration had accelerated the wind industry at almost a restless pace. I was happy that we had the slowdown. I mean, right now it's almost, it tried to do a full stop, but we're still progressing. I saw a picture of Foss Marine moving out the last Vineyard wind turbine
Yeah.
set out of the storm gates in New Bedford this week. So uh, at least there's still construction.
There is, and look, whether you're in wind or oil and gas, and I say they're the same industry because again, the vessels from our side are doing the same thing. So, but if you do bifurcate the industries into oil and gas and wind, the court decisions that have been issued are good things for those in oil and gas because if you allow this administration to arbitrarily halt offshore wind, the next administration could come and use that same playbook to arbitrarily halt offshore oil and gas. And that's not good for any of us. So I've been happy to see that, not just because I'm an offshore wind supporter, but because I'm an offshore oil and gas supporter as well. Um, but you mentioned, well, so what is your, Mark Twain said the rumors of my death have been highly exaggerated. Do you think the rumors of offshore wind's death are also exaggerated?
Yes, I do believe. It's literally President Donald Trump's, experience in Scotland, having, you know, gotten there in at one point in time in 2016, investing in a small Scottish coastal town and having the roads lined with cheering fans, thanking him for investing in their hometown. And then a year later, whatever he learns of offshore wind turbines going up to benefit those same townspeople with cheaper
Yeah,
energy, him fighting against the Scottish people and basically them not giving him such a warm reception. A lot of middle fingers on that second reception, and I don't know. I don't know our president personally. I voted for. I'm proud of the things that he's doing for the country right now. But what I do understand is his ego might not have taken that, and that's a little bit of psychological displacement against this industry right now. That he's taking it out on the American, all of the above East Coast industry.
yeah.
But that's all right.
And you're right. It makes sense in it's not a solution everywhere. Oil and gas isn't a solution everywhere. But in places in the East Coast that have that population density with the electricity rates what they are, and that's before the like you said the plants retiring, or I would add the other factor of the proliferation of data centers in there.
Absolutely.
Certainly makes sense in
And
that,
they're
and
and
have
they're
mhm,
mandating a certain amount of low carbon energy
yeah,
and
yeah.
clean energy being a part of their mix always. So
Yeah,
anyway,
no, that is a good point that it's not that's market that's market driven. That's what we want. We want people to have a market driven. Um, but getting back to you mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to return to it because I know it's near and dear to your heart. You mentioned other sources of energy and other sources of offshore usage. I want to tie that back to your legislative portfolio here as a state rep. Are you going to be working anything in the upcoming session on offshore energy or offshore? I don't want to say it's not necessarily energy, but it is storage of energy byproducts. Let's call it.
so yeah, I mean, I ran for 18 months. I ran something called the Clean Hydrogen Task Force.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what I learned is that in all of the hydrocarbons that we produce from these reservoirs that have been sequestered in strata deep down in the earth for 200 million, 400 million years, in all cases, we're basically pulling out that hydrocarbon, and we're separating the hydrogen, the useful part, and the carbon, which is you could call it the waste product. And there are a lot of companies right now in South Louisiana that are basically primed to be able to provide what they call low carbon solutions, and that is providing, I'm going to call it the high profit point, or high industry creation of these precursor products. So it's the chemicals, the refining, that we of course take massive amounts of crude and we refine it into avgas, diesel, and gasoline here in the United States. But it's all of the other products they get made that go into plastics and food processing, like the Lay's potato chips fried in partially hydrogenated vegetable. Food processing actually is a huge consumer of hydrogen, as well as all the fertilizers, all the ammonia plants.
Mhm.
Basically, the same thing. Need a lot of hydrogen. Hydrogen is something that if any refinery can have a limitless free tank of as much as they want, it would be hydrogen. So almost all the hydrogen produced in Louisiana is like one of the second largest producing states of hydrogen in the United States, and it primarily comes from natural gas coming in and mixing it with water. I'm going to call it in a pressure cooker, and in the pressure cooker, you basically liberate the hydrogen, and the carbon that was in the hydrocarbon combines with the oxygen and turns into carbon dioxide. So you could produce a lot of hydrogen and capture that carbon dioxide. And I know carbon sequestration is a hot topic in Louisiana, but I see it, if there's gonna be a new chapter in Louisiana hydrocarbon exploration, production, transmission, and refining, it'll be in the short term to take the carbon produced from it and inject it into to empty strata. There's a lot of places in Louisiana that have the same pore space that should be filled with natural gas and crude and water, but hasn't, practically none of that in it. And that pore space becomes an excellent way to take the hydrocarbon out on one end, separate the useful from the unuseful, and put the unuseful back. So I'm a proponent of low carbon solutions in the near term. I see it as a new chapter in Louisiana's energy story, primarily because we have all the pieces required to make it happen. And there's
Well,
going to be legislation on that this year. More.
I love it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And again, just like what we've talked about throughout your career, it's about finding these adjacent spaces or these new spaces, because you can't just keep relying on the same thing. And I applaud you for that. So that sounds like a very good legislative initiative, and something that we here at AMSA hope happens. Um, you know, Angela, you haven't asked any questions yet. What do you want to know?
Okay. So I will say that your breakdown of the hydrogen mixed with the water to take out the carbon, that reminded me of why I didn't go into the medical field because organic chemistry. So I will say that. But I do want to I think it's very fascinating, your physics background and you going to M&M and not really knowing how that would, um, like how your physics background was relevant, and then finding out, and then that connecting to you being the executive director to restore and retreat, or sorry, restore or retreat. I think the connection of it all is interesting. And so follow up question to that is do you take any of that physics into the family business, and then overall when you figure it out, okay, I want to go to college for physics, did you envision yourself using it to this day as you are now?
Oh, I did. I do remember many, many times, I guess, getting pitched jobs to work with lift boats in the offshore oil and gas, and being in a very, very technical meeting and having engineers say, well, we're not going to get into the technical side of it, and I'm like, you could try me. I think I could hang. So I didn't have any problem, and the physics, the physics background basically prepared me for that. And a lot of jobs, there were some jobs that other lift boat operators had asked on, and they were like, they're saying they can't do it, and I just using trigonometry and knowing about soil data, and having read log of boring and test results, and being able to make very accurate penetration estimates of our lift boats in that soil at that platform, knowing that the deck and the heel pin of the crane was going to get to a certain height, that we would be able to swing that compressor into that spot, so that others had just not putting pen to paper and going through the exercise, the scientific analysis of it. Yeah, Lee, let's take the job. I think we could definitely do it. So it helped. It actually, Rudy Hall with Keystone Engineering had worked on some of these really, really tight to get accomplished projects in the Gulf. And then he's the one who designed the platforms that were Offshore Wind's first platforms in Block Island. So, it was like a full circle. It was like seeing him before going up to the East Coast and Offshore Wind was even a thought. Having Rudy Hall come into my office and explain how he had, really analyzed this, and if it's done right, and you could get to the exact right position with your DP vessel, with the bow thruster and the controllable pitch, we could do this job. And it worked out. It was a good full circle to see the physics and the education all come in and help, as it did in crop forecasting in Mars, at M&Ms, and now to some extent, now it's basically what's called mass sediment transport, looking at how much mud is in the Mississippi River water, and how much land could be built through diversions and things like that, or dredging 5 extra feet in the river, and how much all of that borrow material will equate in a 3-foot bay or something like that. Being
Yeah.
able to do the math.
Well, and I want kind of your answer there, and some of that reminds me. You just mentioned something as an example or as a side earlier, but I caught it barely. I can barely understand what you're talking about here. It's way above my head, but I want you to explain, because it is so cool. You talked about Tarzan swinging a thruster under a drill ship. Explain that, because that is so cool that we can do things like that. Explain what
Yeah.
that.
Well, you have a drill ship, and this one was kind of a square box that had 4 thrusters, but the thrusters weren't all the way at the edge. They were underneath
Yeah.
the drill ship, kind of inward somewhere. So they would send divers down to weld these chaining points, and then basically they would let the thruster get dropped, uh, you know, from the bottom of the boat, and basically loosen up one chain and tighten up on another one to slowly Tarzan swing the thruster to the edge of the underwater box, where the lift boat could grab it and put it on the deck, bring it into port. It get rebuilt, ABS tested, returned back to us. We go back out there, drop it down right at the edge of the underwater vessel, and then Tarzan chain it back in slowly with come-alongs and things like
That is so cool.
Yeah, it is
Just that.
cool.
And we're not talking about something the size of like an outboard here. We're talking about something that's like 20 feet tall.
that. Right.
It's
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah.
10-foot diameter prop, 20-foot tall, I don't know, 80 tons, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool that we have that technology, and we have not just that technology, that kind of, to use your term, that Cajun ingenuity, that we can figure out how to do that. And, it's not, I think a lot of people think of that term, that Cajun ingenuity, as just kind of winging it. But no, it's the trigonometry behind it. There's the physics behind it. You have all of that, but you're just, and kind of to your first point, also you have all that, but you're also willing to take the risk, the calculated risk. And that's so cool. And what I love about this industry.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Angel. Appreciate it.
Was good. So, that kind of talked back to what I think is so cool about this industry and in the maritime space and maritime in America. What are some other factors that keep bringing you back to this industry beyond, your family history and representing the people that live and work in this industry? What are the other factors that keep you engaged and to keep you excited about this space?
Well, knowing that you're fighting for Jones Act protections, and you did great in the offshore wind, you know, me buying into all the Europeans wanting to come over and quote invest in our workspace, and then seeing at every turn where they try to short the corner. No doubt. No doubt, but we were always there, I always liked our Gulf of Mexico non-unionized labor force, and then went up to the East Coast and got to see a highly unionized
Mhm.
pro Jones Act. It was like
Yeah.
it's a weird family mix, to be able to work in that, and that always it stretches your mental canvas on people that you could disagree with, and politics of course does that as well to you. That you have to learn to get along and work along, and I could be in the legislature just barking at a Democrat on something that we're you know standing on opposite ends of, and people in the audience thinking they must really hate each other the way they're going after it. But just like the old cartoon, whenever the whistle blows, and then we have lunch together or something. So even in Baton Rouge, I know it might not be the same in Washington as much, but at least in Baton Rouge, we all line up at the feed trough or at the watering hole and buy each other drinks, and it's very, very good camaraderie across party lines, across political spectrums. And basically I think working in the maritime industry in the Gulf, and then expanding that to the East Coast, help stretch my fabric of understanding of personalities and political and regulatory regimes. So I grant that. I give that to that
That
industry.
makes me feel so good to hear you say all that because you should, that's how it should be. We
Yeah.
shouldn't all have the same opinion or the same beliefs because then nothing good comes from that. But we should be able to talk about it or fight it out and then go from there. So that makes me feel so
Yeah.
much better about our state and life.
And I think people, there there is the belief of, if it bleeds it leads in news coverage, and no one wants to hear about Republicans and Democrats working together. They want to hear about people fighting. But to prove that there's a lot more camaraderie than what you hear, and what I think is always great when people come up with us to DC to do our crawfish boil and to do those events in DC, you really do see how these people can work together, just like I did. And you mentioned Senator Ed Markey earlier. Um, Ed Markey and Jeff Landry actually traded king cakes back and forth for years after Jeff left the house because they just liked each other and they got along. And so I do think there's a lot more of that behind the scenes of what people realize.
Understood. You're not surprising me. I could completely understand. And you know, I guess what is it? Politics makes strange bedfellows, or whatever it's called. But
Yes.
all
Not so
right.
strange sometimes too. So,
Yeah.
Rep Joe, you've been so generous with your time, and I know that you are a busy man because you have 17 jobs. So, do you have any final thoughts for our audience today?
For the maritime industry, I would say, keep, in your own workspace, always look for new opportunities.
Yeah.
That goes without saying. You can't never be complacent with the same old as is always. I would say think out the box, but I would rather people just say, "What? There's a box? I didn't even know there was a box." So just just dispel. For me, it was utilizing the vessels in whatever way, shape, or form we could safely, you know, uh, make pay with them. And so whether it was the scientific coring or offshore wind or whatever it was, I would say, uh, keep our maritime industry supportive of the Jones Act. It's very important that we do that. It's for our own, naval benefit, security benefit as well. Uh, Focus less on the protectionist side of it and more on the benefits that come from it. Uh, that's it. And know that you know many of us are just fighting for that all of the above energy that we're going to have hydrocarbons for the production in the Gulf for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And as long as we're getting GOMESA funds that we could pour back into coastal restoration, we'll continue to preserve that working coast, those local communities, and that unique culture that we have down here to the longest possible extent. And that's what I'll be fighting for. So thank you all very much for the opportunity.
Love it. And we will be standing shoulder to shoulder with you as you do so, Rep. So thank you so much for coming on. It's great to have you.
Yes.
It's great to talk to you. Always great to talk to you. So thanks so much. Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
That wraps up another episode of Maritime in America. We're proud to highlight the voices and stories that keep the American offshore industry strong. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us, and remember, the course ahead is shaped by those who step up and steer. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your crew. Tune in every Friday for your offshore briefing, and don't miss our next full episode, dropping soon with the very special guest's Mariner's Perspective. Catch you next time.